We're in Matthew chapter 5 this morning. Our scripture reading this morning is the Beatitudes, which we covered. I hope you're taking advantage of the Bible classes. We talked about the Beatitudes in Bible class this morning. We're going to pick it up right after that. I'm not working here either, guys. It's just one of those days. Oh, there we go. There's Charlie. All right, had to get Charlie Brown. I love Charles Schultz. I grew up with Charles Schultz. Charlie Brown, how many of you know who I'm talking about? I used to grab the paper from my dad. I know this is foreign to all of y'all. We used to have newspapers, and they actually had news in them. And on one page of the newspapers was what we used to call the funnies. I don't know about you. It was called the funnies, and Charlie Brown was always at the top. And I used to love it. But in this one, I couldn't find the exact words, but I remember Peppermint Patty has sitting there, and he's got Chuck, and he tells Chuck, he said, Chuck, I went to school. On the very first day of school, I got sent to the principal's office. And Chuck, it's all your fault. And Charlie Brown says, well, Patty, how is it my fault? I wasn't even there. Why are you always making it my fault? To which Patty said, well, Chuck, you're my good friend. You should have been a better influence on me. And it's funny, but it's not, because there's truth in that. The reality is we as followers of Jesus should have an influence. We should have an influence on people because people are watching everything we do. People are listening to what we say. People are looking at how we act. We have influence. Now, sometimes that influence is good, and sometimes that influence can be bad. If you're doing something you shouldn't be doing and someone's watching you, you may lead them to do something bad that you're doing. Understand, people are always watching. I heard a story one time about a preacher who was out and he was doing some work for his wife. She wanted a trellis built on the side of their house, had this vine, and it was going to grow up the vine. Anyway, he's out there doing some carpentry work. He's got his hammer and he's nailing this stuff together. A little boy from the neighborhood comes by and he parks his bike in the street and he just sits there and watches him. Hammer and hammer and hammer and hammer. And as hours passed, the little boy's just sitting there watching him do his carpentry work. And the preacher thought, man, he's pretty impressed with my carpentry skills. So he invites the young boy, hey, you want to come up and see what I'm doing? He said, pretty good, huh? He goes, no, I don't care anything about what you're building. He goes, well, then why are you sitting here? He said, well, I want to see what a preacher says when he hits his thumb with the hammer. True? Yeah, people watch us all the time. And sometimes they watch us just to validate what they do. Sometimes they watch us to validate how they act. Sometimes they watch us to validate what they believe or how they speak or how they think. They look at us to validate, oh, well, he's a Christian, and if he did that, then what I'm doing is okay. Influence is there. You know, it was crazy. Dana and I were watching Dr. Phil, because there was nothing else on. Dr. Phil's talking to this young guy, and right at the beginning of the show, he asked them who they are and what they do, and he says, well, I'm a social media influencer. And I'm sitting there going, that's a job? You can actually get paid to do this? I was talking to Jared about this the other day, and Jared told me in one thing he read, it said between the ages of 8 and 18, the job of social media influencer ranks like in the top 3 of what kids want to grow up to be. What happened to astronaut? How many of you wanted to be an astronaut when you grew up? Oh, come on, really? Man, I met Neil Armstrong, and that's all I ever wanted to be was an astronaut, you know? Or a fireman? Shane, thank you. How many of you wanted to grow up and be a cowboy? Not the football playing type. I know no one wants to be a Dallas Cowboy. I'm talking about with the horse and all that kind of stuff. Really? No? You know, but now people want to be a social media influence. I actually had to look up the definition because I'm like, if you can get paid for this, I kind of want to know what it is. Here's. Oh, sorry. You guys doing it? You're doing a good job. I forgot. I'm just going to set it down. Anyone who has the power to affect others' decisions because of their authority, knowledge, position, or relationship with their audience. If you have that, then you're a social media influencer. A following in a distinct niche with whom they actively engage. Okay? In other words, if you're good at, I don't know, decorating your house, I guess you post a bunch of stuff about decorating your house, and everybody goes and looks at how you decorate your house. And you influence people. But let me tell you something. Jesus was probably the foremost influencer of people. I can think of no other human being in history that has influenced more people than Jesus Christ. And the reality is, he calls his people, which is us, to carry on the task, to be influencers as well. The first 12 verses that we read, commonly called the Beatitudes, have to do with our relationship with God, about our inner character, who we are inside. And Jesus is going to move from that inner character, from who we are really inside, to now how do we transmit that outward into a world, okay? He's going to do that starting in verse 13. So if you've got your Bibles, let's go there. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. I didn't put it up here. Just read it with me. He says this, "You are salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." If the Beatitudes talk about our inner self, our inner character, then this metaphor that Jesus gives us of salt and light talks about an outward action. How do we take that character then and put it into practice? Now, when Jesus uses salt and light as an analogy or metaphor to talk about here, he's talking about two images that are still very, very common to us today. Although, because it is so common for us today, we miss the real value of it. I mean, people don't think too much about salt. It's everywhere. It's in those little packets. It's in salt shakers. They throw it out on roads when it gets icy. I mean, we got salt everywhere. And in my house growing up, it was a little tubular thing, and it had a dark blue cover on it, and there was a little girl holding an umbrella. Morton salt. How many of y'all had that in your cabinet? Right, you know what I'm talking about. And if you needed more, you just went and you poured it out. It was kind of like that. It was always had salt in it. Okay, and light's another thing that we are so accustomed to that we miss the analogy that Jesus uses here. I mean, you want light in your room. What do? You walk over to the wall, you flick a switch, and light comes on. Right? You want to go outside. Even now, if you go outside and you don't have a light, what do you use? Your telephone. It's got a flashlight on it now, right? And I know what y'all are thinking. Hadn't it always had a flashlight? No, it has not. We actually had cell phones before that didn't have flashlights on them. I know that's hard for y'all to believe, but it's true. It's true. We actually had these things called flashlights. The little round things you carried them around. Y'all know what I'm talking about. There you go. Yeah, beam. Yeah, you got it. But it's so readily available to us, maybe we lose a little bit of what Jesus is talking about here. Salt in the ancient day was valuable. Matter of fact, the Romans considered salt to be the most valuable commodity on the earth, with the exception of the sun itself. As a matter of fact, certain Roman soldiers were paid in salt as their wage. That's where this phrase, you ever heard the phrase, "he's not worth their salt"? That's where it comes from. It was their monetary wage. It was valuable, light in the same way. So Jesus comes into this thing, and he makes an interesting statement, though. He doesn't say, "You will become salt." He says what? You are salt, and you are the light of the world. Not you will become, or you might be, or you need to work on it, but you are. He pronounces our saltiness, and he pronounces our lightness, if you will, right off the bat in his sermon. Now, I got to tell you, in 25 years, I can't tell you how many weddings I've done. I probably should have kept count, but I didn't. Okay? But there's a point in time in every single service that I perform that fundamentally changes forever the two people that are standing in front of me. No matter what, when I get to the point in that sermon when I say, I now pronounce you husband and wife, understand, before I make that statement, neither one of them were either of those. They were engaged, they were in love, they were all these different things, but they were not husband and wife. But as soon as that statement comes out of my mouth, guess what they now are? Husband and wife. It's not, I now pronounce that you will become a husband. No, you are a husband. You may be an inexperienced husband, but you're still a husband. You may be an inexperienced or a brand new wife, but you're still a wife. It's not something you are to become or grow into. It's who you are. And Jesus here says this, if you're in my kingdom, if you're a disciple of mine, if you're following what I say, it's not you will become salt, it's you are salt. It's not you will become light, it's you are light. And the very moment you give yourself to Jesus Christ, the very moment you profess in faith that he is Lord, that he is the Son of God, that you commit to him by submitting to his will for you to be baptized. When you do that, it's as if Jesus looks down and says, I now pronounce you salt and I now pronounce you light because you are a follower of mine. So the real question for us to answer why? Look at verse 13 again. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. The second part of this verse gives us some insight into what being salt should mean. The verb that's translated being salt or losing its saltiness is the Greek word moriano, or I can't even pronounce it. Moreno. Help me out, Jared. How do you say that? I'm good. Thank you. Church got way more Greek than I do, so I always go to him for that stuff. All right? Moreno. And it simply means this, to become insipid, to make as a simpleton, to become a fool, to make foolish, to lose savor. This is the same verb when he says to lose its saltiness. Okay? So there's a process going on here. As a matter of fact, it comes from the Greek word moros, which we get, you know what word? Moros means dull or stupid. That's what they said, moms. I know we're not supposed to use the S word, but I said stupid. Okay. Heedless, a blockhead. Blockhead is actually in the dictionary under the definition of this word. I thought it was a mistake. I had to look it up again. No, blockhead is right. So, that's there. A blockhead. Absurd, foolish. So what's Jesus saying here? He's saying, look, for salt to lose its saltiness is completely absurd. It's foolish. As a matter of fact, if salt loses its saltiness, is it even salt? What is it? This is the exact same verb used in Romans 1:22. When Paul talked about those who claimed to be wise but became fools, same word. In their understanding of who God is. It's the same word used in 1 Corinthians 1:22 to describe how God's wisdom made foolish the wisdom of the world. Same one. As it relates to salt, Jesus is simply saying that Christians who lose their saltiness are in fact making a fool of themselves. It's foolishness to say, I'm a Christian, and then not display the qualities of a Christian. It's foolish to say, I follow Jesus, and then not live like you follow Jesus. It's foolish to say, I believe in God and I believe his word, and not obey his word. It's foolish. So Jesus is saying, salt that loses its saltiness, it doesn't make any sense. So, with that understanding, what does being salty mean for us? What does salt do for us? The first thing it does is taste, okay? How many of you like to cook? It's not a slight. I like to cook some things. Okay. I like to eat what's cooked, even better. Now, let me ask you this. For you cooks out there, how many of you know of how many menus or how many recipes? How many recipes are there that don't require salt? Not very many, are there? You just about have to put salt in every recipe that's out there. Why? Is it because we want things to taste salty? No, it's because salt enhances the flavor that's already there. It brings out flavor. It makes you taste the other flavors even more so. So when Jesus says we are to be salt, think of this in terms of who you are in your community, who you are in your family, who you are in the world. You, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, need to make life more tasty, more savory for those we influence. We should be adding to the lives of others. Some Christians are so devoid of joy, they're just, how do I say it, boring. Okay? And they don't add anything to the life of others. Oliver Wendell Holmes was reported to have said that he might have become a preacher if certain ministers that he knew hadn't always looked and acted like undertakers. I hope that's not how you see me. Truly, I hope you don't see me as an undertaker. I pray that you don't see yourself that way, and I pray that you don't act that way. You know? I mean, sometimes just to look at your faces, I have to wonder. I mean, that last song we sang, did you look around? I won't be judgmental. Some of y'all weren't shining your lights. Some of you didn't have your finger up in the air. It's, that's for kids. It's not for me. Right? Some of you were like, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. You weren't Charlie Brown, you were Eeyore. Okay? But you understand what I'm saying? We are so devoid of life sometimes, and we think it's pious for us to act like, oh, life is terrible, life is awful, I just want to go eat worms, right? But that's not what Christianity's about. It shouldn't be. There is joy to be found in following Jesus Christ. Will there be trouble? Yes. Will there be persecution? Yes. Will there be suffering? Yes. But will there be joy? Absolutely. And if you can't put that joy on your face, you're like salt that loses its saltiness. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So add some flavor to your life. Add some flavor to the lives of those people you come in contact with. But in addition to giving taste, salt also functions as a preservative. It preserves things, okay? There are two food-like substances in the Bible. Both are very small. Both are very powerful. There's salt, there's yeast. Yeast is simply a mold, and it's typically used to describe evil or compromise or sin in the Bible. And then salt, again, is talked about, and it talks about how it prevents or holds back decay. People in the first century, they didn't have freezers, they didn't have refrigerators. So what they would do is they would coat the meat with salt in order to preserve it. Okay? It kept things from going bad. Now, understand, sometimes it didn't make anything good, but it did keep it from going bad. Church, we got to be preservatives in our culture today. The cultures of our homes, the cultures of our families, the cultures that at work, we need to preserve the rightness that we see. Because we live in a rotting, decaying world that is full of mold. And God has placed us within it to have an antiseptic type reaction to the world. We are there as help, as preservatives, to hold back Satan and his work. Ray Pritchard said it this way: we who follow Jesus are to be a moral disinfectant, stopping the spread of evil. We are to be the conscience of the community, speaking out for what is true and what is right. We see this modeled in Jesus time in and time again. That's why we seek to preserve the sanctity of the unborn human life. That's why we speak out against it. Why? Because we want to hold back the forces of evil and darkness that want to move forward. We speak out against hatred. We speak out against racism. We speak out against anything in our culture that goes counter to what God says. Why? Because we want to be a preservative in that culture. We want to hold back the mold of sin that's around us. But in order for any of this to take place, we have to be injected into whatever it is we're preserving. In other words, it does no good to have salt over here and meat over here and say, well, I've got the salt to preserve the meat. In order for the salt to affect the meat, they have to come in contact. And church, let me tell you something. In order for us to have an effect on our community, we have to come in contact with it. If you think about it, this is the salt shaker. We're all little pieces of Morton salt sitting inside that big blue cylinder. That's us. We are salt. Jesus has already proclaimed and told us that's who we are. But at some point in time, we got to turn this thing upside down and shake it all over the community. And this salt's got to get out there to where people live, where sin happens. And I'm not saying we're perfect and we don't sin. Don't get that from this. We are all flawed. But the difference is we have the message of the gospel, which deals with sin. We got to get shaken out a little bit and get into the world so we can have that effect. The last thing salt does is it creates thirst. It creates a thirst. You've heard the old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but what? Can't make him drink. Man, I tell you, as a preacher, I think about that all the time, right? I can lead them there. It's up to them to drink it. But you know what? You can make a horse thirsty. Put a salt lick out in the field somewhere close to his watering trough. He'll go by, he'll lick that salt lick, and guess where he'll head to right next? Water. Right. You can make him thirsty. Let me ask you this. How many of you besides Paul like those really big super buffets? I know Paul does. Paul, you're alone. Oh, I get a couple more. No, but did you ever think about this? I mean, think about this for a minute. You have all of this food sitting out, right, everywhere. And I mean, everywhere. What's the name of that place we went to? Chow Time? Yeah, I mean, I think they took all of the food from China at once and moved it to that restaurant. It's all there. It's all there. It's all right there in that restaurant. And I'm telling you what, they give you this plate and you pay whatever you pay, and they say, yeah, go back as many times as you want, right? Did you ever notice, though, how salty the food is in buffets? It's very salty. And it's not because they're trying to enhance the flavor of the food, okay? Let me tell you why. They make the food salty so that you will drink more. Because the more you drink, the less you eat. So what you end up doing is paying $18.95, right? And you go in there and they give you a plate and they say, eat all you want. And you're like, oh, they're going to lose money on me, right? Because I'm going to eat 5, 6 plates, and I take my math, my calculator, and I go, okay, 5 plates divided by $18. That's $3 a plate. That's cheaper than anywhere. Man, I'm going to make out like a bandit. You eat about halfway through that first plate, and you're on your 3rd glass of tea. And you're lucky to finish 1 plate, and you're like, what? Oh, I'm stuffed. I can't eat another bite. Ding, they win, right? It creates thirst. As disciples of Christ, we should be creating a thirst for Christ in those we influence. God should be able to use us to make people thirsty for Jesus and thirsty for a relationship with Him. I fully believe this is what Paul's talking about in Colossians chapter 4 when he says, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And you combine that verse with 1 Peter 3:15 that says, in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. When we treat people with gentleness and respect, creating a thirst for the message of Christ, they will be more apt to listen to the message, and our influence will be for Christ. Salt is a seasoning, it's a preservative, it creates thirst. But as I said before, in all 3 cases, it must be brought into contact with what it wants to influence. Now, while salt is a visible thing, light, on the other hand, or salt is a hidden thing, light is a visible, tangible thing we can see. It's a revealing thing. Before Adam and Eve were even created, the Almighty brought light into existence in Genesis chapter 1. Throughout the Bible, light is used to represent grace and truth and the awesome activity of God. Darkness, on the other hand, symbolizes sin and evil and the works of Satan. Jesus himself is personified as light. Look at John 8:12. John 8:12 tells us, this is Jesus speaking. He declares himself to be, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In our passage today, we are told we are light. And the Bible makes it very clear. All who catch and reflect the light of Christ are themselves called light. Ephesians 5:18, talking about Christians who, matter of fact, it says you were darkness, not you were in darkness. Interesting play on words here. Paul doesn't say you used to be in darkness. He said you were darkness. That's who you were. But no, you are light in the Lord. Why? Because God's already pronounced you to be light. Live as children of light. Again, our text, Matthew 5. You are light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand and give it to light everyone in the house. Jesus mentions two sources of light. First, a city set on a hill. The imagery here would be very common to those people of the day. Many of those homes and cities were built out of limestone, which after a while gets very white. You take that and you put it up on a hill, it would reflect the sun all day long. You couldn't hide a city like that. You would see it from far off. It would glisten in the sunlight. And he says that Christians, that's who we need to be. The second light source he talks about in verse 15 is a light or a candle. Again, we take this so for granted because if we want light in here, we walk over there, right over there, and we flip a switch and light comes on. We don't question it. And if there's not enough light, we go tell Sean. He puts brighter bulbs in. Right? I mean, we got light everywhere. But in that time, there was probably one candle or one lamp in each house and maybe a small table or a box, and they would use it. And as the sun would set, they would find that one source of light. They would put it in the middle of the room. They would light it, and it would light the entire room. And again, the absurdity that Jesus talks about here, no one would even think about taking a basket or a bushel or a bowl and covering up the only source of light in the room. As a matter of fact, I can imagine as Jesus makes this statement, there's people laughing. It's that absurd. It would be like coming in here at 8 o'clock at night with all the lights off and everybody sitting in darkness, with the light switches back there on the wall and nobody going back there to flick one on. We'd be going, man, that's crazy. Just go turn the light on. I mean, it would be that absurd. It's absurd not to have light. So what does it mean to us to be light? A couple of things. First, light dispels darkness. It's active. John 1, 4 through 5 says this. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. Understand, folks, if you live as light in this world, people will not understand why you do what you do. They will not understand why you react the way you react. They will not understand why you prioritize your life differently than everybody else in the world. They will not understand why you choose to watch or not to watch certain things on TV or certain forms of entertainment. They will not understand it. Why? Because they do not have the light of light in them. It dispels darkness. It brightens things up so that we can see more clearly. I was reminded of an old story of a farmer, and his wife was known in the entire county as not being very pleasant to the eyes. Okay? Y'all know what that means? Okay. She had a wonderful personality, though. But anyway, this old farmer's out with his young farmhand, and the young farmhand's getting ready to go court his young lady. Okay. Courting is what they used to call dating. Okay? You got that? Do y'all understand that? Okay. Courting, it's not like talking to or in, that somebody gonna have to explain that talking thing to me, right? Are we talking or are we not talking? Or anyway, courting, when I say courting, that just means they were dating. Good? Okay. Just got to clear that up. Okay. So the young farmer's about to go out, and he's got a lantern with him, And the farmer says, yeah, when we used to go courting, we didn't take any lanterns with us. We just went in the dark. And the young man turned around and goes, yeah, look what that got you. Just saying, light has a way of illuminating things in life, right? You know, sometimes the darkness, better to keep it dark. Better to keep it dark. Sometimes we don't want to see everything. But isn't that true of God? Isn't that especially true of this? Man, we don't want to open it up because we don't want the light of truth shining into our lives because we might see what's really there. We might see just how ugly we are inside when we let the light of this shine into who we are. But Jesus calls us light. Why? Because he wants us to be people who dispel darkness, who shine the light of Jesus Christ to so many. The other thing light does is it gives guidance. Psalms 119, 130 says this, the unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. When we live out our faith in the midst of our family, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our very life can guide people on the right path. How are you influencing those around you? What are you doing in your life that tells your kids God is the most important thing in our lives, in our family lives, in your life, no matter what? What are you doing to tell your neighbors the exact same thing, your coworkers the exact same thing? Or are you telling them there's something else more important? Because let me tell you something, whatever you make important, you are influencing them to believe the same thing. What kind of influence do you have? What are you telling them is most important? How are you guiding them? Lastly, light reveals what is truly there. Psalm 34:5. Those who look to him are radiant. As we turn our attention and lives to Christ and live in his presence, his light will radiate on our faces and lives. Dana and I learned this very lesson Friday. We took a drive. We went down to Fort Pickens, enjoyed our time there. Looked around, never been there before. It was cool. Came back, found a nice little beach there on the National Seashore, and thought, yeah, we got a couple hours to kill before it's time for lunch. Let's just go sit out and watch the waves. We did for a couple hours. And the radiance of the sun shined on our faces, as you can tell. This is after a couple of days. We look like lobsters walking off that beach. We knew better. Do we need the sunscreen? No, we won't be out there that long. Do we need the umbrella? No, we won't be out there that long. And the radiance of the sun reflects on us. Now let me ask you this. How close are you to Jesus? Are you close enough to him that the light of his life reflects off of you? Or do you stay hidden from him so that it can't? So that it can't reveal what's truly there. And understand the motivation for all of this. He sums it up in verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine, what? Before men, that they may see your good works and praise you for the wonderful Christian that you are. No, it's not what it says. That they may see your good works, your good deeds, and praise your Father in heaven. Because see, as we radiate the light of Christ to others, God is glorified, not us. It ain't about us. We do what we do to give God the glory, to show God the praise, so that the world will see God in all that we do. We reflect Jesus to others so that they don't see us, they see God. The literal translation of that is they will esteem or render him glorious. And that's what we want. That's what we want. That's why we were created, to give God glory and to glorify him to others. Jesus is teaching us and expecting us to live out lives of faith openly before a watching world. And we as his followers have been pronounced to be salt, adding flavor, preserving, creating thirst. He has pronounced us to be light, dispelling darkness, giving guidance, revealing what is true. Our lives should be lives that reflect and add something more than what the world has, because we have something more that the world has. We have Jesus Christ. He has saved us. He has forgiven us. He has changed our hearts. He has given us hope. He has put His love in us. He has given us joy, and He has set our feet on the rock which cannot be shaken. And if that's not reason for joy, then I don't know what is. But that joy's got to be shaken out into the world. So this morning, if Jesus isn't making a drastic difference in your life today, then you either need to come to Him in obedient faith, confessing Him as Lord, putting Him on in baptism, and then living a life of faithfulness, because He will then declare you to be salt and light. Or maybe if He's not making a drastic change in your life right now and you already are a Christian, maybe you need to repent of the fact that you aren't being the kind of influencer Jesus wants you to be. He asked the question, will you be salt and light for me? I've declared it to you. It's not a matter of you learning. You just go be it. The question today is, what will you do? Will you stay in the shaker? Will you leave the switch off? Jesus is asking you to be simply what He's already pronounced you to be. He's asking, as the song we're going to sing says, what will your answer be? More importantly, who will you be? If we can help you with anything, let us know as we stand, as we sing.